My stepson and his friends broke into my garage, filmed themselves calling me a zero and wrecking my car. I sued, and the ruling was handed down at his graduation. Subscribe to the channel and share your stories in the comments. And now let's get started. It was my house. Not metaphorically, not sentimentally. Legally, financially, stone by goddamn stone, it was mine. I bought it with the money I earned in trades that blistered my hands and stole my weekends. The hardwood floors, the granite counters, the old garage with the oil-stained concrete. All of it came from me. My sweat. My choices. But if you walked in, you wouldn't know it. Not by the way Jake acted. Not by the way his eyes skimmed over me like I was another appliance buzzing in the corner. He was 17, built like someone who thought gym selfies were currency, and carried himself like he'd already won something. That cocky posture wasn't earned. It was inherited from some absent man whose legacy still echoed in this house through old pictures and whispered phone calls at night. The first time I heard Jake say it, I was setting the table. I had grilled steaks even though I knew he liked chicken. Trying. Always trying. He sat across from me, slouched so deep he might as well have been falling. Then he said it, loud enough to cut the room in half. "You're only here because Mom lets you." I laughed at first. Thought maybe it was a joke, some teenage attempt at sarcasm. But when I looked up, Betty wasn't laughing. She was chewing her food like nothing had happened. Just a blink. A silence. Then she said it. "He's just going through a phase." A phase. Like it was acne. Like the contempt didn't stain the air we breathed. Like it wasn't shaping the way my children, Noah and Lily, watched this family fracture every time we sat down to eat. Because that's what it was. Fracture. A slow, splintering crawl across the foundation I had spent years trying to build. Noah would glance at me with those quiet, nervous eyes. 10 years old and already learning what it meant to keep your head down. Lily, only 7, would fold into herself when voices rose. But Jake would roll his eyes. Jake would leave his dishes. Jake would take up more space than the table had to give. And Betty? She'd call it growing pains. Teenage mood swings. She'd laugh and pour more wine. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think this was something I could outlast. But even then, deep in my gut, I felt it, the slow erosion of something vital. Something no one else in this house seemed to care about. Respect. He never used my name. Not once. Not when I picked him up from school. Not when I replaced the tires on his car. Not when I paid for his field trip or filled out his FAFSA form. He called me that guy when talking to his friends, if he referred to me at all. And Betty? She never corrected it. Not once. That first year was the hardest. Because I still believed. I believed in effort, in time, in the gravity of consistency. I believed that showing up mattered. That by doing the work his biological father never did, I could earn something real. Not love, maybe, but respect. Space. A voice. I was wrong. Every rule I made, Jake broke. Every boundary I set, he mocked. If I asked him to be home by 10, he walked in at midnight. If I asked him to take out the trash, he left it for the raccoons. And every time, Betty made excuses. "He's just testing you. It's hard for him. You know how his dad was. Just give it time." Time became the currency I was bled for. 3 years of it. 3 years of being the second voice in my own house. Of being told I was overreacting when I found beer cans in the bushes, when I caught Jake swiping $20 bills from my desk, when I saw how he looked at Noah with contempt just for existing. And still, I tried. Because that's what men like me do. We keep hammering even when the walls cracked, even when the frames bent. We keep believing that structure is better than chaos. That family, no matter how forced, is worth building. But love can't grow in contempt. It rots there. I remember the night I found him in the garage. My garage. He had left the door open, lights blazing, engine running. He was sitting in the driver's seat of my Mustang, keys in the ignition, music thumping from his phone. I stepped in and froze. He looked up at me, smiled like a wolf, and revved the engine. "You really think this car's yours?" he said. "You wouldn't even be here if Mom hadn't let you in." Then he peeled out, tires screaming. leaving a fresh trail of rubber across the floor I had epoxied with my own hands. He came back 2 hours later with fast food wrappers on the seat and the smell of smoke clinging to his hoodie. Didn't say a word. Just tossed me the keys and walked upstairs. I stared at the Mustang for a long time that night, running my fingers over a new scratch that hadn't been there before. When I told Betty, she didn't even look up from her wine. He's just acting out. No, he was drawing lines, and she was letting him. The next day, I opened my desk drawer, took out a small black notebook, started writing everything down. Dates, times, incidents, evidence. Because that's what you do when you know no one is coming to defend you. You become your own witness. Still, I hoped. God help me, I hoped. I made dinner. I fixed leaky faucets. I helped Noah with his math and Lily with her reading. I kept trying to create a space that felt like home, even when it felt like living with squatters in my own life. But the cracks kept widening. Jake would come home and toss his bag in the hallway like it was a hotel. He stopped greeting me, started muttering things under his breath. I'd catch snatches of it as he passed. Loser. Not my dad. Leech. Leech. Me. The man who paid for his braces. I began to sleep less. Started checking the locks twice. Kept the garage key on me at all times. Not because I feared him, but because I didn't know what was left to lose. And through it all, Betty remained a shadow. She'd smile in the mornings, kiss my cheek, ask how work was, but she never, not once, defended me. Not when Jake insulted me, not when he threw a tantrum in the driveway, not when he shouted at Noah for touching his skateboard. Silence, in a house full of noise, speaks louder than anything. I started going to work earlier, coming home later, sitting in my truck for 10, 15 minutes before walking through the door, just to breathe, just to brace. Noah noticed. One night he came into my room while I was tightening a loose doorknob. "Dad," he said, soft, careful. "Why doesn't Jake like us?" I couldn't answer. I put the screwdriver down, hugged him, told him it wasn't about us. But I lied. It was always about us, about what we represented. Proof that I could be a father. Proof that Jake's real one had failed. That was the crack Jake couldn't stand. The one Betty refused to seal. And me? I just kept standing in the wreckage, hoping for a blueprint that never arrived. But all houses settle. And some of them settle into ruin. That summer, the tension turned physical. Not punches, not slaps, but doors slammed so hard they cracked paint. Chairs scraped across floors like threats. Arguments that ended with walls shaking. I began recording things. Not out of paranoia, out of necessity. Because I knew no one would believe me when the explosion came. And it would come. Jake had stopped being a teenager. He had become a tyrant. And Betty, she had become a priestess of appeasement, offering sacrifice after sacrifice in the name of peace. But peace without justice is surrender. And I had given enough. So I ask you now, before the rest unravels. If your home became a battleground, and you were the only one bleeding, how long would you stay? I stopped speaking the night they laughed. It wasn't a laugh meant for joy. It wasn't the kind that echoes off the walls and fills a house with warmth. No, this laugh was cruel, sharp, gleaming with contempt. A sound made to wound. Came from the garage. I was upstairs when I heard it. The old floorboards vibrated, not from impact, but from the gut instinct that something was wrong. You learn, when you live with disrespect long enough, to hear danger even when it whispers. This time it didn't whisper. It rang. Jake and his friends. I don't know how many. 3? 4? Their voices bled through the vents, thick with that adolescent arrogance that comes when no one has ever taught you how to fear consequences. I moved quietly, down the stairs, through the hallway, past the kitchen where Betty stood, wine in hand, watching some reality show she pretended made her feel less alone. The door to the garage was open a sliver. Enough to see. They were crowded around my Mustang. My Mustang. The only thing I had left that was purely mine. A '66 fastback I'd restored over a decade, one bolt, one screw, one blister at a time. I didn't drive it often. Just on Sundays. Just when the world got too heavy. That car was my reminder. I could still build something beautiful, something that ran clean, something that obeyed. Jake sat in the driver's seat, door open, one leg out, smirking, a beer in his hand. His friends stood around with their phones out, filming, laughing. Old loser thinks he's tough because he owns a car that barely runs, one of them said. They laughed. Jake leaned back, looked right into the phone. You know what's funny? He said. This car is not even his. Nothing in this house is his. My mom lets him pretend. Like a stray dog we let sleep inside. Laughter again. Then the sound I'll never forget. The deliberate scratch of a key against paint. Once, twice. Long, slow arcs. My name carved in damage. Let's leave a little love note, Jake said, giggling. He cries more over this thing than he does over his own kids. They howled. One of them fake sobbed. Another made honking sounds. Then they took turns posing next to the damage, taking selfies with thumbs up. That's when I opened the door. The laughter stopped. Jake turned his head, saw me, and froze. For the first time in months, he looked genuinely startled. Like a child who realized the stove really is hot. He stood, tried to explain. Something about jokes. About no real damage. His friends slipped past me like shadows, their courage vanishing as quickly as it had arrived. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, watching, letting the silence stretch. Jake faltered. It's just a car. Don't be so dramatic. I turned, walked to the Mustang, ran my hand over the scratches, deep, jagged, into the metal. Then I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone. What are you doing? He asked, eyes narrowing. I raised the phone, took photos, close-ups, wide shots, the beer can on the floor, the faces in the videos still visible on the phones they left behind in their rush. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't curse. I didn't threaten. I just documented. He tried to laugh again, but it was brittle now. What, you gonna show Mom? Big man running to tattle? Still, I didn't answer. I walked past him, into the house, past Betty, who looked up with glazed eyes and asked, Everything okay? I looked at her for a long moment, then said, Just tired. That night, while they all slept, I stayed up with my laptop. The footage went into a folder. So did the screenshots. The car's title. My insurance policy. The police report form sat open for a long time before I typed a single word. I didn't fill it with emotion. I didn't embellish. Just the facts. Just the evidence. Just the truth. The next morning I made the calls. First the police. Then a lawyer. I explained what I had. What I wanted. The damage wasn't just cosmetic. It was intentional. Documented. Public. They said the case was strong. That juvenile court could still handle a 17-year-old. That a civil suit could cover damages if the criminal charge didn't stick. I thanked them, hung up, saved everything to 3 different drives. And still, I didn't say a word to Betty. Why? Because I had learned. Words don't matter in this house. Not mine. Not when hers covered every wound with a soft apology. He's just lashing out. He's going through a tough time. Don't take it personally. So I stopped talking. And I started acting. That weekend, I made sure Betty and Jake were both home when the officer arrived. Jake was on the couch, headphones on, scrolling. Betty was folding laundry. The knock was sharp. 3 times. Authority has a rhythm. You learn to recognize it. I opened the door. The officer asked for Jake by full name. I stepped aside. He's in the living room. Jake looked up, confused, one earbud dangling. The officer explained, calm, formal, that a report had been filed, that he was being served, that this was now a legal matter. Jake blinked, laughed, then saw the papers. His name, printed bold. The charges, vandalism, property damage, accompanied by a court date. Betty stood up, confused. Wait, what is this? The officer turned to her. Ma'am, your son has been officially charged in a property damage case. The complainant is the property owner. She looked at me. I looked back. You did this? she whispered. I documented it, I said. The law did the rest. Jake exploded, called me names, said it was a setup, that I was ruining his life. I didn't flinch. Betty tried to intervene. Please, Alex, we can deal with this as a family. You don't need to go to court. This is his senior year. This could affect college. I looked at her then, really looked. You said it was just a phase, I said. You said it would pass. But it didn't. It escalated. And you protected him. You let him rot in that defiance. She stepped back like I'd struck her. Jake stormed off, the papers clutched in his fist. Later that night, Betty tried again. He's scared, she said. He's a kid. No, I said. He's a man who thought he could destroy and laugh about it. Let him explain his laughter to the judge. She cried, said I was being cruel. But cruelty is letting a boy believe he can do anything without consequence. Cruelty is building a future on silence and calling it love. I slept in the garage that night, on a folding cot, beside the Mustang, the scrape on the side glinting like a wound under the dim bulb. I didn't mind. Felt more like home than the house ever did. Jake was served the papers at his graduation ceremony. I chose the moment. I made the call. I told the officer where he'd be, what time the diploma was handed out, what he'd be wearing. Some might call that petty, vindictive, but I didn't do it out of spite. I did it for truth, because Jake lived his life with a spotlight on his ego, public mockery, public defiance. He made a spectacle of his disrespect. So I gave him what he'd earned, a public reckoning. He stood on stage, grinning, shaking the principal's hand. The crowd clapped. Cameras flashed. Betty beamed like this was the moment her son had arrived, that he'd become something. And then the officer stepped forward. Jake saw him too late, heard his name, took the envelope with slow, confused hands. For a moment, the stadium went quiet. No cheering, no music, just murmurs, confusion, then silence. He looked at the papers. His face paled, then flushed. I could see it from my seat. He knew. He knew exactly who had done it. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I didn't blink. I just watched. After the ceremony, Betty cornered me by the car. Her voice shook. What the hell is wrong with you? She hissed. This was his graduation. His moment. No, I said calm. It was his consequence. Her mouth opened, closed. She looked down at her heels, at the hot pavement, at anything that wasn't my eyes. Then she said the quiet part. You're ruining his life. I shook my head. I'm letting it catch up to him. There's a difference. Jake didn't come home that night, or the next. I heard he was staying with a friend. I didn't ask which one. Didn't care. The house was quieter without him. Not peaceful, but less charged. Betty moved through the rooms like a woman trying to unring a bell. She made dinners, left them covered in foil. She asked me to talk, to reconsider, to think of the bigger picture. I already had. I'd spent years thinking of it. And it looked like this. 3 weeks later, the court date came. Jake sat across from me in the courtroom, shoulders stiff in a borrowed blazer. His friend's parents had driven him. Betty sat beside me, trembling. She didn't speak. The judge read the statement, watched the video, reviewed the damage report, looked at Jake. I see no remorse in your expression, he said. I see entitlement. This wasn't a mistake. It was arrogance. Recorded arrogance. Jake opened his mouth, closed it. The words were gone. The laughter, too. The judge assigned community service. A fine. Mandatory counseling. It wasn't jail. But it was a record. A mark. Something that would shadow his college applications. His scholarships. His pride. Betty cried in the car. Not for me. Not for the years she had watched Jake spit in my face. But for the version of her son she believed still existed beneath the anger. He's not a bad kid, she whispered. He's never had to learn this way. That's the problem, I said. You never let him. When we got home, Jake was already there, sitting on the porch, waiting. His voice was flat. You made your point. I nodded. Good. He stood. What now? That's up to you. He hesitated. Looked down. You gonna press charges for the damage? Like, real charges? I looked at the Mustang, still scratched, still wounded. No, I said. But you will pay every cent it takes to fix it. His jaw clenched. I don't have that kind of money. Then you'd better start working. I walked inside. For a week he didn't speak to me. But I watched him get up early, walk to the mechanic shop 3 blocks away. Saw the grease on his hands when he came home. The blisters. Betty saw it too. He's trying, she said. I didn't answer. Trying wasn't enough. Noah and Lily watched it all from the corners of the house. They had learned to stay quiet, to observe. I hated that. I hated what they were learning about family, about loyalty, about silence. One night, Noah asked me if Jake was going to leave. I don't know, I said. Would that be better? I looked at my son, at the small line in his forehead, already there from worry. I don't know, I said again. 2 weeks passed. Then Jake knocked on the garage door. I was under the hood of the Mustang, cleaning out debris from the fan belt. He stood there for a long time before speaking. I shouldn't have done it. I didn't look at him. I know, I said. I was angry. I know that too. He paused. I thought you'd yell. I thought you'd hit me or something. I wiped my hands. I'm not your father. He flinched. The words landed harder than if I'd slapped him. I want to be better, he said. Then work. He nodded once. Walked away. That was the first honest exchange we'd ever had. But it didn't erase the years. It didn't fix the balance. Betty started talking about family therapy, about healing, about how maybe finally we could start again. I said nothing, because I didn't know if I wanted to start again. Not with her. Not with him. Not after what I had seen. Love without defense isn't love. It's abandonment dressed in civility. And I had been abandoned for 3 years. That Sunday, I made breakfast. Pancakes. Bacon. The smell filled the kitchen. I didn't call anyone to the table. I just waited. Noah came first. Then Lily. Quiet. Hopeful. Jake followed, hesitant. He didn't sit at the head. He sat near the corner. Eyes low. Betty brought the orange juice. Placed it down without a word. We ate. No shouting. No sarcasm. Just forks and plates. A start. But not forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because the truth doesn't go away. I had been the ghost in my own house. I had been the target. The ATM. The failure. The joke. And now I was the judge. And my verdict was silence. It was the sound of dishes being washed that told me something had shifted. Jake stood at the sink one morning. Sleeves rolled up. Hair damp from a rushed shower. He didn't speak. Just scrubbed. Dried. Stacked. He wasn't helping, not in the real sense. He was repenting. Quietly. Methodically. The way a man does when he doesn't yet have the words for guilt. Only the weight. Betty saw it too. She started smiling again. But it was a fragile smile. The kind people wear when they're afraid of testing good fortune. She'd ask how my day was. Sit closer on the couch. Reach for my hand when the kids weren't looking. I let her. But my grip stayed loose. Because I had learned what her silence cost. She'd stood behind Jake when he mocked me. When he violated my trust. She'd let her son write the rules while I paid the bills. She'd called my exhaustion a mood. My frustration, just stress. And now she wanted the warmth back. But warmth without shelter is just exposure. And I wasn't stepping back into the cold for anyone. Jake got a job, real hours, real sweat. The local tire shop, $12 an hour. He'd come home with black under his nails, new blisters on his palms. The Mustang fund grew slowly, each crumpled 20 tucked into the jar on my workbench. He never asked when the debt would be paid. He never asked how much. That was new. Noah started speaking more. Lily laughed again. She asked Jake to help her with a science project one evening. He said yes. I watched them at the table. Her crayons. His notebook. A truce, maybe. Or maybe just weariness. Betty cried behind the bathroom door some nights. I heard her. I never went in. Because sorrow is not the same as change. And forgiveness is not a guarantee, not in this house. Then came the letter. From the university. Jake had been accepted. A mid-tier state school. Close enough to drive, far enough to feel like freedom. He showed the envelope to Betty first. She squealed, hugged him, called me into the room like we were a family again. Look, she said, eyes bright. He did it. He got in. Jake didn't smile. He looked at the floor, at his hands, at me. I know you're not paying for it, he said. I just wanted to say I get it. Betty blinked. What? Jake, no, don't say that. Of course we'll figure it out. He shook his head. No, Mom. We won't. I did this. The room went quiet. I sat down, looked at him. What's your plan? I asked. He swallowed. Financial aid. Loans. Maybe scholarships. And I'll keep working. I'll figure it out. I nodded. Good. Betty stared at us like she was watching strangers. After he left the room, she turned to me. You're really not going to help? I met her eyes. He made it clear I'm not his father. He gets to live with that truth now. She opened her mouth, closed it, shook her head. You're punishing him. No, I said. I'm freeing him, and myself. That night, she didn't sleep beside me. She took the couch. I didn't follow. Weeks passed. Jake packed slowly. He bought secondhand bedding, a used laptop, notebooks from the clearance bin. No complaints. No requests. I saw the change in him. It didn't move me, because change built on desperation is not repentance. It's survival. And I had survived for years in a house that called itself home while treating me like furniture. The night before he left, he knocked on my door. I was reading, my glasses fogged with the heat of the room. I looked up. Yeah. He stepped in, held out a folded piece of paper. What's this? A receipt, he said. For the Mustang. I called the shop. That's the estimate. I know I still owe about half, but I'll keep sending money, even when I'm gone. I looked at the paper, then at him. You're not doing this for me. He paused. No, I'm doing it for the man I should have seen years ago. I didn't answer. He turned to leave, then stopped. I'm sorry, Alex. Not Dad. Not Father. Just Alex. I nodded. He left. I stayed in the room, reading the same sentence over and over. But the words didn't land. Because here's what no one tells you about vindication: it doesn't heal. It just confirms the wound was real. The next morning he left. No big goodbye. A hug for Betty. A wave for Lily and Noah. A nod in my direction. The car he drove away in wasn't mine. It was borrowed. Like everything else he'd built. The silence he left behind was the same silence he'd created when he lived here. Just cleaner now. Less venom. But hollow all the same. Betty hovered more after that. Tried to cook. Tried to talk. Asked about my day. I answered in half sentences. Because my heart had moved out of the house before Jake ever did. Noah asked if he could help me with the Mustang one weekend. I said yes. We worked together in silence, the kind that doesn't bruise. Just two hands on tools. Two minds on gears. Lily watched from the steps. Drew us in a notebook. Labeled it Dad and Me. Betty saw it. Said nothing. She knew. Jake called once a week. Spoke to his siblings. Not to me. I didn't take it personally. Because nothing in this house had ever been personal. It was transactional. Conditional. Fragile. One night, Betty asked me if I still loved her. I didn't answer. She asked again. Said the kids needed stability. That we had made it through. But we hadn't. We had endured. There's a difference. Surviving something isn't the same as healing from it. And I had bled too long under the name of patience. The day I put the final coat of paint on the Mustang, I stood back and looked at it. The scratch was gone. The body was whole. But I knew where it had been. I knew what it had meant. Some wounds don't show once you fix the surface. But they're still there. That evening, Betty cooked my favorite meal. Steak. Potatoes. Wine. I ate it. Said thank you. She leaned forward, eyes wet. Is this it? She asked. Are we just never going to talk about it again? I put my fork down. You didn't defend me, I said. For years. You let them break me, and you called it love. She whispered something I didn't catch. Then louder, I was scared. So was I said. And I still showed up. She cried. Real tears. Maybe the first honest ones in years. I didn't hold her, because the bill had come due. Not just for Jake, but for all of them. And I wasn't paying anymore.